It's a pleasure to be with Toronto again. We have such fond memories. We spent so many years here and we love Toronto. But what I wanted to do today is invite you to my home today, which is in Israel. The topic that I chose for today is ancient synagogues. It's a topic that I'm fascinated by. There is so much literature out there, both the written and the archaeological excavations that started over 100 years ago, uncovering synagogues and are still ongoing today. And I'm away from Israel on a visit for 2 or 3 weeks. I come home and I say, what's new? Because we're always uncovering new things. So what I'm going to do is just introduce you to something that's a very wide topic, but at least you have an idea of what is going on in the research, in the writing, etc. Now, I've divided the Zoom today into 3 sections. The first section is going to deal with synagogues that existed during Temple period, up to the year 70 when the Romans destroyed the temple. The second one is post-temple, but it's synagogues that have a lot to do with the first period. And the third one is going to be the shocker, which is dealing with synagogues that have various mosaic floors. And believe me, you're going to be pretty shocked if you've never seen those synagogue mosaics before. Agi suggested that after the second group of synagogues, we have a short 5-minute break, at which time I'll answer questions. And if you want to have a short break, get a drink, whatever. After the third synagogue will be covered, the third type of synagogue, the mosaics, I'll be happy to answer as many questions as you have. I'm not in the time limit, so if you didn't get your questions in the first session, there'll be lots of time to talk about after the presentation is over. And now let's get to work. For the title page, what I've done, you can see on your screen, various menorahs. Why do I have that? Because that is the Jewish symbol par excellence. Many people believe or think that the Magen David is the Jewish symbol. It is today, as you see in our flag. However, it's only the last few hundred years that the Magen David has become a Jewish symbol. If you go back 2,000 years, it was just a decorative part. That and the swastika, by the way, both come from the Far East, and they're adopted by very different groups as their symbol. If you see a Magen David 2,000 years ago, could be anything. If you see a menorah, you know you're in a Jewish site. And just about every synagogue we're going to be seeing has either one that's carved like this one, the one that's painted in mosaic, etc. So this is the major symbol of synagogues 2,000 years ago. As I said, the first things we're going to deal with is the synagogues that, is the synagogues that existed during the time of the temple. In the old city, in the city of David to be exact, we found this very interesting inscription, the Theodotus inscription, it's called. It's written in Greek, because even though the Romans are in charge of Israel, Greek still remained the international language during the entire Roman period. And you'll see that all inscriptions, even as late as the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, are all in Greek. And we're told there about a synagogue that existed in Jerusalem at the time. Theodotus is the son of Betenus, priest and head of the synagogue. He is son of the head of the synagogue and the grandson. In other words, 3 generations this synagogue exists, and this is before the destruction of the temple. And what is the synagogue for? Reading of the law, Torah reading, just like we do today, teaching of the commandments. It's also a school, and we'll get back to that later. And it is also a guest room. It's a hotel with water fittings, etc. Why? While the temple existed, we know from various historians, Josephus and various Roman historians, that it wasn't a few people that came to Jerusalem to celebrate the holidays. We're talking about tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands. These people came. Where were they going to stay? There were no hotels. So generally there were 3 camps around the city where they camped outside, but whoever could invited them into town and gave them a place to stay. The synagogues would host their own people. Imagine Toronto Synagogue in Jerusalem hosting all guests from Toronto who come to celebrate the holidays. So this is one example of a synagogue that existed right next to the temple. There are many people who think that when the temple existed, there were only sacrifices and no prayers, and that is not true. It may be true for First Temple Synagogue, we don't know, but certainly not true in Second Temple Synagogue period. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. The Jews went to exile in Babylon. And that's when they started building what in Hebrew is called Mikdash Me'at, a small temple, which is another word for a synagogue, and prayers began. When they came back and the temple was rebuilt, there were actually prayers on the Temple Mount. We know that even some things that they prayed, they used to recite the Shema, they would recite the 10 Commandments and so on. There was at least one synagogue very close by, and this was standard. I want to move now to the next place that also a synagogue that exists during the time of the temple. And anybody who's been to Israel, I'm sure, has been to Masada. It's a very important fortress. This is the only thing that survived the Roman destruction of the temple in the year 70. And for 3 years, the people up here held out against the Romans. Very famous story. I'm not going to review it. Now, aside from being so hard to scale, they had a wall built around the perimeter of the mountain. And to make things easier, when they built their homes, they were built all around the perimeter, because that way, one of the walls of your homes was already built, and you just had to have 3 more walls. The synagogue is right over here. This is the synagogue in Masada. Now, I want to focus a little bit on the architectural features here, because we're going to see these recurring over and over again. First thing, you see the steps along here, you can't see, but there's also steps along this side. These are not steps, these are seats. In ancient synagogues, for hundreds of years, we find that synagogues, that's how people sat, around the perimeter. The pillars are interesting as well, because the pillars tell us that this is a basilica shape. Now, today when you mention the word basilica, you immediately think about a church. It's synonymous with a church. But originally, a basilica was simply an architectural form of construction. Why was it invented? Because in ancient times, if you wanted to build a house, you built your 2 walls. If you were poor, it was wood. If you were rich, it was stone. The ceiling was made of beams of wood across from one wall to the other beams perpendicular, and on top, they would have mud and straw dried and spread on top to stop the rain from coming in, which means that the size of your room was limited to the tallest tree around, which in Israel is about 5 meters. Now, the Greeks and the Romans, they want to have larger buildings, larger structures. What do? They design what's called the basilica shape. What you do is you have these pillars built. Now, what you do is that you then are able to put a beam from wall to pillar, from pillar to pillar, from pillar to wall, and you've just tripled the size of your room. And that is how many ancient palaces were constructed, and that's how things were done. Now, I'm showing you this room. How do I know it's not just a gathering place? How do I know it's a synagogue? And first of all, the benches surround, but more than that, it's what we found in the room right over here, which is part of the synagogue. What did we find there? We found there a geniza. What's a geniza? You know, if you have a prayer book or a Bible that rips, you do not throw it in the garbage. You have to treat it with respect. And generally, most synagogues have the place where you come in, you leave it there, and when they have enough, they bury it to show it respect. We found a geniza right here in this room, which indicates it's not just a meeting, a hall, not a palace, it's a synagogue. And what did we find in the geniza? That is amazing. The archaeologist who excavated Masada was Yigal Yadin in the 1960s. And as he says in his book on Masada, I could not have arranged for a better chapter to be found than what was actually found here. We found a chapter of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel lived during the destruction of the Second Temple. He was taken to exile in Babylon, and there he prophesied to the people, first telling them to please try and amend their ways, and once the temple is destroyed, a lot of prophecies of consolation. The people are so depressed. Don't forget, they've never been exiled before. They don't know that they'll ever come back. Their hope is gone. And Ezekiel tells them a vision that he has, and he said, in my vision, I saw a valley filled with bones, skeletons of people. And God said to me, can these bones live? And I say, of course not. And he says, watch. And he has the bones coming together. They become walking, living, talking human beings. And God tells Ezekiel, tell my people Israel that if I can make skeletons come to life, I can also bring them back to Israel, give them hope. Imagine how we felt when we found this particular chapter right here. This is after 2,000 years of exile, thinking, are we ever going to come back to Israel? And the great miracle of getting Israel back actually happens. And we find in this excavation on Masada, which is a symbol of the resistance, we found this chapter right here. So this is the synagogue in Masada. We know for sure it predates the destruction of the temple because people were here and it was destroyed just after the temple was destroyed. We're moving all the way north now. We're moving to Gamla. Gamla is in the Golan Heights. This is the beautiful mount of the Golan. Over here, you actually see the Sea of Galilee. Let me move to the next picture because this shows you a little better the Sea of Galilee and Gamla, this town Gamla. I want to go back to this one because you can see better why it's called Gamla. Gamla, Gamal in Hebrew is camel. And if you look at this, it looks like a hump of a camel. And that's how the site got its name, Gamla. Now, if you're living here and you want to protect yourself because the Romans are coming, or anybody else is coming to attack you, you don't have to worry about anywhere around here. All you have to worry is about this is the only access point is here. And here is the wall that was built by the people of Gamla against the Romans who are attacking. The Romans, Vespasian and Titus, his son, started in the Galilee. Took them 4 years to get through the Galilee, the Golan, and then move down to Jerusalem in the year 70. They come to Gamla before they come to Jerusalem. And what's amazing about this site is that after it was destroyed by the Romans, it was never rebuilt. Now, that means that everything that we found, nobody built on top of it and destroyed it. And we found amazing archaeological finds here. And over here, you can see the wall. And we actually, if you see it, it's not that clear in this picture, but there are 2 places where you see breaches in the wall that the Romans made with their battering rams. You actually can see that today. Now, over here in this area, right over here, built against the wall, is the synagogue of Gamla. Let me show you what it looks like. First of all, right next to the synagogue, we found a mikveh, a ritual bath. We found altogether 4 in Gamla. There may have been many more. We didn't excavate the entire site, but 4 that we found, which shows that that was a very important aspect of the religious life. And having one next to the synagogue may mean that people actually used it daily before going to the synagogue. We're not sure, but it definitely is an important part of the ritual. And look at the beautiful synagogue that we see here. Notice this around the steps, sitting around. Notice also here is the doorway and the beautiful view that you have. And it's quite a large building considering the size. The homes were very small and this is large. Now, both Masada and the synagogue don't quite face Jerusalem, but we can excuse that because of topographical necessity. You see how it's built on the mountain, just as Masada was built into the wall. So it's leaning towards the south, but not quite south, a bit southwest. So it's not quite Jerusalem. So this is the synagogue, and I want to focus on one special thing that we found in this place. You see the wall right over here at the end. The city wall is just a little further, but in that room, you found another smaller room. This is what it looks like excavated, and this is reconstruction. You see there's a window here, and there are chairs all around for people to sit. And this was probably the Beit Midrash, the school, the yeshiva of Gamla. We found many synagogues had that. One other important thing to note, when I showed you the synagogue, we don't have a place for an ark. Today, an ark is a central feature in every synagogue. Early synagogues did not have an ark. Only later did they start having an ark. So where was the Torah scroll? They didn't have many scrolls. So what they used to do is keep it generally in the room next door, as you see here, and bring it into the synagogue when they needed to read the Torah and take it back to where it was. Now, there's one specific, I want to add something about this particular place because this is something that's very unique to the Jewish people. We know there was a sage called Yehoshua ben Gamla. Yehoshua ben Gamla lived way before the destruction of the temple, over 100 years before. And he said, it is not fair, it is not right that only the sons of the rich should have schooling. He instituted compulsory Jewish education, specifically geared for orphans and poor people from age 6, 7, and up. Can you imagine 2,000 years ago, we had compulsory Jewish education, and maybe the room we're looking at here is just such a school where children learned because of Yehoshua ben Gamla. So this synagogue also preceded the destruction. Just to show you where we are, this is the Sea of Galilee. Over here, overlooking the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee is Gamla. We're going to be looking at several synagogues around here. We're going to be looking at MIGDAL, which is over here, Tiberias, which is over here, Capernaum here, another one just a little further up the hill, of KORAZIM as well. Why are there so many synagogues here? Because after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the year 135, the Romans were so fed up with Jewish rebellions, they totally destroyed Jerusalem. They made it into a Roman city, Aria Capitolina, and they made life very, very difficult for Jews. And that's when the majority of the Jews moved to the Galilee and the Golan. And that's why we find so many synagogues at this time. I want to move to the last synagogue of the first type that existed during the time of the temple. And it's in the city of Migdal. Migdal, as I said, overlooks, it's on the Kinneret, on the shore, just a few miles north of Tiberias. It was called Nunya, Migdal Nunya. Nunya in Aramaic means a fish, because the fishery, obviously the most important industry at the time. And we found a very wealthy town all here with a lot of different industrial areas. We found beautiful streets that were lined up. And we also found mikvaot, ritual baths, which indicate that this was definitely a Jewish city. Nobody else had a ritual bath except for Jews. By the way, when you mention Mary Magdalena, what's Magdalena? She came from the town of Migdal. This is where she came from, because this is where Jews lived. Magdalena is just the English translation from Migdal. So this is a very Jewish city. And we found here in this city a very, very interesting synagogue. And again, predates the start of the temple. We found some coins in this area that go back to 19 Common Era. So you're talking a good 50 years before the destruction. Look at this is from on top, looking at the picture. It's not a very big synagogue. And notice that this is a synagogue, the benches around here. And around the perimeter, there are little rooms, probably the same type of Bet Midrash, a place to have the Torah, to bring it in and out. Here you can see in this picture what it looks like. You can see the seats around. Notice this stone, because we're going to be looking at it in extra detail. This was a very elaborate, it was a rich town, and the very elaborate synagogue over here, we see mosaic floors. We also see that what they had was frescoes on the wall. We found some of them. Fresco means wet. What they used to do, the technique was that you put plaster on the wall, and when it's still wet, you paint the wall, so the paint seeps in. So even if the top layer gets worn away a little bit, you still see the color behind it. So this was a very invested synagogue and very precious. Let's go to this stone that I was talking about, because it's very unusual with all the decorations on it. We don't know what it was used for. The theory is that this is the stone on which, or like a bima, this is where the Torah scroll was brought for reading of the Torah. Notice this side of the bottom side again, we have the menorah. Just like we mentioned, every synagogue has a menorah. And on both sides, we have amphoras, there are containers, probably oil, in order to put into the menorah. Over here on the side, you see that there are pillars around here. You can look inside through the pillars into a building, and you see a rooftop. The theory is that probably it's trying to indicate the temple, because we're so far away. You know, if you're talking a good day's journey, if not more, from Tiberias to Jerusalem, people didn't go every day. And this is thinking about the temple as you're worshiping yourself. This side has a very interesting thing. There are two wheels, one here and one here. There are different theories as to what these wheels mean. Some theories, and we'll see another one clearer that that's what it is, suggest that this is maybe talks about the ark that was moved, the tabernacle in the desert that was moving, the ark that was moving. Or some say it could also refer to the chariot of Ezekiel. In the first chapter in Ezekiel, there's a very description, we don't really understand what it's talking about, of a chariot which goes in different directions, different heads. We don't really know what it means, but it seems to imply that this is how God runs the world. Maybe this is the chariot of God running the world, or a symbol to it. As I said, these are just guesses. We don't know. We're not sure. On top, you see there are rosettes, 6 here and then 6 around the outside, 12. Could be again for the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is a very beautiful, very unusual stone. We just discovered it a few years ago, and it's still being fixed up, this area, and it's definitely worth visiting if you're coming to Israel, just a few miles north of Tiberias. Those 3 synagogues existed during the time of the temple. I'm now moving to the second part, which is synagogues that existed post-destruction. We're here in a place called Kfar Nahum, the village of Nahum, literally, and in English, Capernaum became very famous because Peter comes from Capernaum. And of course, this became a very important site for Christians as well. You see the remains of the synagogue, but let me tell you, just over here on the other side, you don't see it here, is a very important church, and both are visited all the time by pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims and non-Jewish pilgrims and Christian pilgrims. Over here, Kfar Nahum, we found not just like in MIGDAL, we found a whole village, also very wealthy. I guess being on the Kinneret meant that you had access to fisheries. It brought a lot of revenue in. The village that we see here is built like insulae. Insulae means like a little contained areas where the core family would live, and then it would develop into there. They had their storage inside the rooms. They had the living quarters inside, and between their little alleyways between each insulae, one house and the next one. Notice here's something very interesting, how they built windows. Now notice the black stones, that's basalt, very close by the Golan Heights, which is all formed by lava, eruptions of lava. Now over here, these are very strong. Lava is makes very strong stones. So these are upright. On top, there's other beams, which means that these are windows, not going to the outside, but between the rooms. So the one room that had access to the outside, you'd be able to look in and have light coming into the second room, which was totally enclosed. And I'm pointing this out because you can see how all these are built from lava stones, black stones. Not the synagogue. They spent a lot of money to import special and to work on beautiful white stones for the synagogue, that it has to be nicer than the homes. If you look here, you see what we think the synagogue looked like. We know for sure there was a second floor because we found staircase in the back. This is what you see when you come there today. Now, obviously, this was the pillars were much higher than this, but they want you to see the beautiful capitals. So they took the pieces of pillars that they found and put them on top. And here you can see how large it is. Again, notice the basilica shape, and you don't see it here, but there are benches all around the outside. This is a picture that is in front, what the people, what archaeologists think the original synagogue looked like, because we also found the yard, and usually there was a yard attached to the synagogue. So this is a very large and very wealthy synagogue. And here you can see the entrance. This is the entrance is just beautiful. The stonework here is beautiful. And this is seeing it from the front. The workmanship is unbelievable. This is all carvings in stone. Now, these stones are just outside of the synagogue itself, and it's in what they call an archaeological garden. What's an archaeological garden? Well, whenever you see that sign, it means that we found these here and we have no clue where they belong. So you put it together, you give it a very fancy name, archaeological garden, and that's what it is. But I want to show you this stone again. This is the same picture of the same stone, but I want to show you both with this one. It's a bit more visible. Remember, I mentioned the wheels. Here it's clear the wheels do not talk about the prophecy of Ezekiel. You see the wheels, and on top you see there's a building, there's a structure here. So this either is the tabernacle being moved or the ark being moved, because we know the ark was moved from place to place. It was brought to war, it was taken back, and we know that the ark did travel. So maybe that's what this is talking about, and that's what it is. Let me just go to the next one. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one picture I want to go back to for a minute. Oh, no, here. I neglected to speak about this. I mentioned the fact that the stones are basalt stones, and the synagogue itself is white. Now notice here, This is the foundation. The foundation was not visible, which means that the earth would cover it, so you wouldn't see the foundation, but it's cheaper material to use and it's very strong. And only from here up did you notice it. But notice how the line is not exact. You see how the white line does not correspond to this? This convinced the archaeologists, and plus they found some evidence, they don't want to undo this, that this is a synagogue was built later. This is about 5th century, and we believe there was another synagogue before it, which followed these particular lines. Some of the installations here, we found this an olive grinder, they made olives here, we found wheat grinders, a lot of different things found here. It's at a very wealthy town. Now, on the hill, excuse me, on the hill overlooking the Sea of Galilee is a small little town called KORAZIM. KORAZIM is not nearly as wealthy as the two towns we looked at are on the Sea of Galilee, and it's much smaller. It's definitely a Jewish town because you enter right over here, there's a mikvah, a ritual bath. What I want to focus here is on a different, I don't know if you can call it a synagogue, but it's definitely a place of prayer, which is right here in the middle. The tree's hiding all of it, but here we have what is the city square. Today in modern Hebrew, the word rechov means street. In Mishnaic Hebrew, rechov means a square. Rechovah shel ir is the square of the city. And this was a very important place because this is the place when they had no rain and they wanted to pray for rain. We're told in the Talmud they took the Torah scrolls out of the synagogues and brought them to the central square. This is where prayer took place because a lot more people had come. It was also a place, an inn for people to come. Like we saw in the synagogue in Jerusalem was an inn. All over that, it was standard. People traveled for days and weeks. And when they passed through your town, they wanted to sleep at night. Nobody had room in their small little houses. They would go to Rechovah shel ir, the city square, and that's where they would be. They could bring their animals as well, and they could be there. So this is the place where Rechovah shel ir is. And I just want to show you an example of an interesting discussion in the Talmud as to what happens about in a place like the square, the town square. What happened in this particular case is that the city square was sold. The developer wanted to build a high rise there. He sold, he bought it. And the question is, what do we do with the money? Because the general rule was that if you sell something of holiness, for example, a Torah scroll, you have to buy something else of holiness with it. You can't buy mundane articles with it. So the question is, if you sell the square of the city, are you obligated to buy holy things with it or not? And why would you think that you would be? Because people pray there. As you see, what's the reason? Rav Menachem Bar Yossi says people pray there. It's a holy place. It's for fast days and the ma'amadot. What's the ma'amadot? During the Second Temple period, all the priests were divided into 24 groups. In every group, a different family of priests would come to the temple. After the week was over, they went back home and they became the teachers. To make it much more inclusive, that all of Israel felt a part of it, they had what's called a ma'amad, a special group that was appointed to accompany each of these priests to the temple. Sometimes they went with, and sometimes this is where they stopped on the way. And even if they couldn't travel, they would pray in their city while their representative priests were at the temple. So Rav Menachem says, look, this is where the ma'amads praise. This is where people go to pray. It's holy. You have to spend the money on something holy. The decision is not that, but it's only occasional. But remember, here we have an example. An outdoor synagogue reminds me a bit of Corona days, a different reason, but we have an outdoor synagogue in this place. It doesn't mean there was no synagogue in the place. Look at this gorgeous synagogue that was built. Here it is, basalt stones, but beautifully finished. This triangular structure went on top of the door. That's where it was. And you can see the amount of work that was on it. Also very, very impressive. And a lot of work put into something in a place that's really not rich. People did not have the money, but it didn't matter. They were still going to spend a lot in their synagogues. I'm just showing you an example. You know how hard it is to carve this in stone? You make one mistake here when you're almost finished, and the whole thing has to be thrown out. You have to start from scratch. So a lot of money and energy went into carving the stones here and making it beautiful. The one unusual thing about this particular synagogue is this chair. This is a seat. You can see here the hand place, for the hand rest. Here you can see the back. On here, the inscription gives credit to the person who donated the money for the synagogue, for the stoa, and this is it. Where exactly was this? Yet we found about 3 or 4 of them in ancient synagogues, and where exactly were these seats? Here. Now you see, this is the entrance into the synagogue. Over here you have the ark. This is a later synagogue, so you already have an ark here. And over here is where the seat was, the Cathedra de Moshe, the seat of Moshe, it was called. It doesn't look just very much like synagogues today, where you have the ark and next to it you have the president or the cantor or the rabbi sitting. So this was very common, and the chair had a specific name, Cathedra de Moshe. Now notice here, it's something very interesting, the direction. I didn't mention the last several synagogues we dealt with MIGDAL, as well as the other ones, were all facing directly to Jerusalem, south to Jerusalem. This is also facing to Jerusalem, definitely. And notice that the door is here in the south as well, which could make it a little bit awkward. Think about it. You're standing praying in your synagogue. The door is in the front, and all the latecomers walk in as you're praying. You see everybody coming in. How embarrassing would that be? It's also not convenient because you're disturbing the prayer. So why was that? The truth is that this is an exception because most later synagogues did not have the doors in the south side. In the south side, they had it in the west or in the north. This, for some reason, because geographically, topographically, it wasn't possible to change it. They kept the door where it was. Now, why were early synagogues built with a door facing south, the same direction as people face as they're praying? Again, I don't have a definitive answer because there are no sources written about it. But from the research I've done, the best theory that I have read is that it was trying to combat a particular type of idol worship. One of the main gods at the time, idols at the time, was called Baal Tzafon. The Baal, the master of the Tzafon, of the north. Very important idol. And his temples were built in such a way that the door was always in the northern part. So when you open the doors in the north, he shines through the doorway and brings the light into the synagogue. Because architecturally, a lot of times pagan temples look the same as synagogues. And if you want to stress the fact that this is not a pagan temple, what do? You move the door all the way to the other side, even though it's very inconvenient, and you have the entrance from the south and not from the north. Once paganism was gone, there was no reason to keep it, and the doors were switched to different places. And that's why most later synagogues do not have doors in the south, and with very, very rare exceptions. Okay, this, I'm sorry, we'll just skip this one. Okay. I'm going to stop here because the next synagogue we're going to talk about is Beit Alpha, which is the first of the series of mosaic floors. So I'm going to stop here. Maybe I'll stop sharing the screen so I'm going to do in this part, I'm going to show you 3 synagogues out of quite a few more. And what I'm going to do, rather than stop and explain what we're looking at and how it's possible for these images to be on the synagogue floor, I'm going to show you 3 synagogues, and after we have seen all 3, then I will try to offer some interpretation of how it's possible and what we're looking at. Okay, so here's the first synagogue of Beit Alpha. Beit Alpha is in the Lower Galilee, Emet Yisrael actually. It's about, half hour south of the Sea of Galilee. And in 1928, as the first pioneers in Israel are working the fields, they are trying to clear the marshes. This is where Golda Meir went when she made Aliyah, and they're working to clear the marshes. The people farming the land, the Jews farming land, come across this mosaic. They contact Sukhenik, a very famous archaeologist from Hebrew U. At the time, Hebrew U started 3 years prior to that. He is the father of Yigal Yadin, who excavated Masada. And And he is the one who, he is the one who, that we, sorry, I'm just trying to move the pictures over so we have to see a little better. Okay. Yigal Yadin, it's the Koenig is the one who comes here and he uncovers the first synagogue mosaic. And when they saw it, they said, this can't be Jewish, must be some cult that we know nothing about, and you'll see why soon. That was fine with one mosaic floor. It was not fine when floor 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 were found with all the same type of mosaics. I have here the top, the southern part of the synagogue. Here is, but this time there is an ark here already. You can see the ark is here. And so what to show it definitely faces south. And notice the top mosaic is right here next to the ark. Let's move to the next picture. Oh, why isn't it moving? Hold on. Okay. The next picture I'm showing you, this is the entire mosaic floor, top to bottom. This is how it looks with the colors. You can see the original colors. The reason the colors stayed the way they are is because these are not painted stones. So mosaics were made, they used stones that were that particular color. And that's why they always retain their color, because the red stones are iron oxides, and therefore they stay red always. Now notice that there are 3 main panels. I'm not talking about the bottom panel, which has lions next to it, inscription. We often, even today, we sort of see on the Aron, there are lions guarding the Torah, and the inscription is the same as we have today. People donate the money and even inscription. But I'm talking about the 3 main panels. This 1, 2, and 3. Let's look at the top and the bottom panels first. The top panel is one where you right directly in front of the ark. What you have here is a large door. You can see it. It's could be either the door of the ark, or more likely, in this case, it's the temple door. Why do I say that? Because there are too many images here associated with the temple. Notice the menorah. We talked about menorahs. The 7-branch menorah was in the temple. Oh, by the way, notice the cute ostriches. We don't usually do many ostriches guarding the Torah. What you see here is a shofar. What you see here is called the machta in Hebrew. It is actually, what do you call it? An incense shovel. It was used to carry the incense to the altar, the incense altar. Or there are other larger ones that we see have red on them that would take in the coals off the altar as well. Over here, you see a very, very important sign, which is the palm leaf, and you have here the 4 species, which are associated with Sukkot. So this is top panel, no problem. Everything is fine, understandable, no issue. The bottom panel also is a very interesting one. And if you notice, this is a story we all know. It's the binding of Isaac. There is Abraham with a knife. There is Isaac about to be sacrificed. There are the 2 servants standing with a donkey farther away. And there is the ram waiting to be sacrificed instead of Isaac. So far, okay, not a big deal. The middle one, this is where the problems begin. In the center, we have the zodiac. Zodiac, today horoscopes, the 12 months and 12 signs of the zodiac. Each of the corners has a season. You can tell the difference in the season. It even says, Tkufat Tevet. This is the winter. You can see the woman is dressed more warmly. This is the spring, and so on. So you have the seasons. You have the months. And in the center, you have Helios, the sun god, riding the 4-horse chariot. This is a very common image in Greek and Roman mythology. You cannot mistake it. This is Helios, the sun god. Look over here, the rays over his head, and the chariot is a very common usage. This is how he's always represented as, the idea is that in the morning, he rides his chariot from the east, goes over the skies, and as the chariot reaches the west, the sun sets. Okay? A bit shocking. And as I told you, when they first found it, they said this must be a cult. This cannot be mainstream synagogue. But then we found others. Another very important synagogue is in HAMAT, TVERYA, HAMAT Tiberias. Hama means hot. Hot springs are found all over here. They're still active today. You can go see the springs. And the fact that the synagogue is next to them is significant because generally hot springs were associated with being holy places. As a matter of fact, Asclepius, the god, today his symbol was the snake that cured the people. And today that's what medical doctors use. This is a sign for medicine. The sign was associated with these hot springs. The city of Tiberias is just a bit north, right over here. And this is just south of Tiberias. Here is the Sea of Galilee. Today doesn't look like this. This is what it looked like when they excavated it. Today there's a structure on top to protect it, to maintain it. And let's see what we're seeing in this synagogue. Here, I do want to stop for a minute to talk about the dedication that is there. Notice again, I mentioned dedication is in Greek because that's international language, except for the word shalom in Hebrew down here. And it tells us, this is also, and this is the Aramaic, which was the spoken language at the time. The dedication tells us that the person who built the synagogue is a man called Severus, who is the student of the Nesi'im, of the people running the Sanhedrin. What is a Sanhedrin? Sanhedrin is a Greek word. It was the Supreme Court, Jewish court. Where the temple existed, the Sanhedrin was on the Temple Mount. When it was destroyed, it moved to Yavne, and then when south of Tel Aviv, when life became impossible there after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Sanhedrin moved north. And it kept going from place to place, from Ushat to Shfaram to ZIPPORI. Its final resting place is Tiberias. Things became very difficult for the Jews around this time. The Byzantines became much more oppressive regime. And in the year 429, the Sanhedrin disbands after having written the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud. And this is when the center of the Jewish world goes from from Tiberias, from Israel, to Babylon, where the Babylonian Talmud is being written at this point. Now, if we're told that this man was a student of the heads of the Sanhedrin, the Nesi'im, this synagogue is early 5th century, late 4th or early 5th, and it can't be a side synagogue. It's a place where the most important rabbis are sitting. This has to be mainstream synagogue, and you can't say this is a cult. So I just want to bring that inscription to illustrate that point. The synagogue, look how beautiful the floor is. In the first synagogue, the art was very naive. That's not because they weren't able to do different things. It was obviously the choice of the people to present in naive art. Here, you can see it's not. It's beautifully done. Look at the top panel over here. You have the same features that you had in the other synagogue. You have here the entrance to the temple, the menorah again. You have here the incense shovel, the shofar, and the 4 species of sukkot, and that is the top panel. In the middle panel, again, the same thing, the zodiac, the 12 seasons, the 12 months and their signs. You have the 4 seasons in the corner. In the middle, you can see Helios, the sun god here. It's another very common way to portray him. You see he's holding the orb in his hand. That is the way Helios was portrayed in Greek and Roman mythology. Look at the rays coming out of his, which explain it. So this is very, very important to understand that this is it. Now, what they did was, obviously another synagogue was built on top of it. This is an earlier synagogue, but they always have to make the very difficult decision for archaeologists. What do we leave for people to see? Because they could have taken it down and showed you the level before it. But because this is such a magnificent synagogue, they decide to stay with it. They just remove the stones. And if you go to it today, this is what it looks like. You see there's an empty space here, which is where the construction ruined this part. So what's missing is the chariot, the 4-horse chariot, but you still see Helios, the sun god, and the rest of it is here as well. But this is synagogue 2, and you see very, very similar stuff that we saw before. The last synagogue we're going to look at, and we're going to look at it in greater detail because the floor is so much more magnificent, is in the town of ZIPPORI. ZIPPORI is a very important city, both Roman and Jewish. This is where Rabbi Judah the Prince brings the Sanhedrin around the year 200. He moves it from a small Jewish city, Shfaram, and from Ushat to here, actually before that, he moves it to ZIPPORI. And He brings it to a cosmopolitan town. The reason being he wants to put it on the map, and you have to be in the main cities if you want to count. This building right over here is a citadel, the citadel of ZIPPORI. If you go to visit ZIPPORI, you'll see the bottom stones that are actually Roman. You can see the Roman design. Above that are Crusader stones, because the Crusaders were here too. And the top part are Arab construction. This was the school for the Arab village in the neighborhood. This is one of the Jewish neighborhoods that existed during that period. We know it was Jewish because, again, ritual bath. You find a ritual bath, you know it's a Jewish area. And notice how close you have a theater. This is a cosmopolitan town where you have Roman entertainment and Jewish towns. We're told there were 18 synagogues at the time of Rabbi Judah the Prince, Yehuda HaNasi, but at the same time, you have an ongoing theater in the city. Now, this is just a small part of the whole town. I'm showing you this picture. What you looked at before is this area right here. You see all these trees. When the Keren Kayemet, the Jewish National Fund, planted these trees, they planted everywhere. We planted 30 million trees in Israel over the last 150 years. We're the only country in the world that we have more trees today than we had 100 years ago. They did not realize that the town actually extended this far. They would never have planted the trees there because the roots are ruining the archaeological finds that we're going to have to eventually look at. But they did excavate here when they realized the town extended further. And we found a beautiful corridor here with beautiful mosaic buildings, trade, etc. So this is a very large city, extended all over this area. One day we'll continue and dig here. The synagogue we're going to look at now is over here. See this red mark right over here? This is the synagogue that we're going to be looking at, the synagogue of ZIPPORI. Now, this particular synagogue has it's narrow, but has a very long mosaic floor. This is a picture. I'm sorry, I couldn't get a better picture. I tried, I couldn't find something much clearer, but you can see there's 7 panels. The top panel, again, we're not going to discuss too much. It's simply the lions top guarding the ark. When you enter the synagogue, please keep in mind you're coming from this side, from this area going in. Oh, by the way, I must mention this. This is the south going north. We don't know why, but this synagogue, instead of facing south, faces north. Nobody is able to give an explanation why this happened. There are few synagogues like that during the 4th, 5th, 6th century, and we have no answer as to why that is. There's nothing in the writing, and we can't even theorize why this took place. So notice that it really begins here. What we're going to do, we're going to start from here and go down and look at them and try to understand what these pictures mean, how they were possible, and what they represent. The top panel, again, very, very similar to what we saw in every other synagogue. Here you have, again, the entrance to the temple. Here you have a much larger incense shovel. This is not incense. This is actually, you see, you can't see the color, but this is red, which means this is taking the ambers off the altar. Again, you see the menorah, the shofar. This is a very nice little instrument. This was used to take the wicks out from the menorah before you cleaned it every night to replace it. And here we have, again, the 4 species. So what's most pronounced is, of course, the palm tree. Now, why is this picture here? Why do we pick this? Obviously, this refers to the temple because these are all temple things that existed in the temple. Why do they pick the 4 species? Why do they pick matzah for Pesach? We know the Jews line up Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Why does each synagogue focus on the palm tree and 4 species rather than on other symbols of other holidays? And there's a good reason for that. First of all, Sukkot was when most Jews did go to Jerusalem. And that was a very simple reason. It was most convenient. To go for Pesach is to travel in the winter. There's storms, there's rain. It's not simple. Shavuot is not that much further, but you're very busy. This is a very busy agricultural season. Sukkot, Hag HaAsif, when you finish gathering your fruit, that is the best time to go because you're not as busy as you are the rest of the year for an agrarian society. So Sukkot is the holiday most identified with pilgrimages to Jerusalem. but there is something else as well that's very important. If you look at this picture, this is a Roman chariot. You see, there's the horses. Now, there was just a race. The race is over. How do I know that? I also can tell you that the person who won the race is this chariot rider right here. And how do I know that? Look what he's holding in his hand. He's holding a palm branch in his hand. The palm branch was a symbol of victory. The victor was given that when he won. And that's how everybody knew who the victor would be. Now notice over here, Vayikra Rabbah, one of the rabbinic midrashim, tells us that it gives an example of two people who come before a judge, and we don't know who won the case except for the fact the victor is holding the palm branch in his hand. Notice how interesting that is. Let me just move that back. Okay, notice how interesting that is, that you are looking at, I'm just trying to move the picture out of the way so you'll see a little better. Okay. Now, that what we have done, we have adopted, as we always do. Jews always learn and adopt things from the material culture around them, but this is no exception. And the palm leaf became, aside from being a sign of the species going to the temple, also a sign of victory. To show you that, I'm showing you a picture here of one of the Bar Kokhba coins. Now, Bar Kokhba was a rebel 65 years after the temple was destroyed, and he wants to rebuild the temple. And therefore, on his coins, he puts a picture of the temple. And on the other side, what do we see? A palm leaf. He wants victory. We're going to be victorious, and we're going to rebuild the temple. So that is no question. The top panel that we saw just a minute ago, this panel is very, very closely related to the temple. Now, the question I was asked before, it actually came in very well, about the tabernacle as opposed to the temple. This is a picture of the tabernacle. It actually takes 1.5 of the scenes. It begins over here and then goes down to the next one. What is this? We're looking at a picture of the inauguration of Aaron the priest to work in the tabernacle. First priest ever, brother of Moses. He's going to be the first priest. First, what we have here is the wash basin where you have to go wash your hands and your feet before you can go to worship. Here is the altar. Over here are the sacrifices. And if you don't know that that's what there are, it tells you in Hebrew, Et hakeves hayachad, the first lamb. This is the beginning of the morning prayer that tells you the first lamb you bring in the morning, and that's the exact quote from there. Over here, unfortunately, what's not showing, it was destroyed, is a picture of Aaron, the priest. How do I know that it's the high priest? If you look at the bottom here, you see there's a bell. We know when we have a description of Aaron, the priest, that the high priest on the bottom of his coat had a bell and a pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, bell, pomegranate. So here is the bell. And if you're still not convinced, it tells you right here, Aharon in Hebrew. See, Aharon, Aleph, He, Resh, Nun. No question, this is Aharon. So there's no question what this is. This is the inauguration. You have the beginning. Now remember, we had the first calf in the morning, which you bring the first kevis, the first lamb you bring in the morning, and the continues then the next panel at hakevis hashani, and the second lamb you bring in the afternoon. There are 2 sacrifices that were brought every day, in the morning and in the afternoon, and with them you also brought shemen, the oil, and solet, the fine flour. That we're told in the Tanakh itself. Chatzotzot, the trumpets, we're not told that you're supposed to blow the trumpets as they bring the sacrifices. The musical accompaniment is only discussed in the Mishnah, which shows that whoever did this obviously is using Mishnaic sources and not just biblical sources. This picture is a very weird one. Again, we can't explain it. We know what it is. This is the showbread. Every week, there'd be 12 breads baked and put into the holy, no, not the holy, the holy in the temple. And at the end of the week, the priest would eat it, and then new ones would be put up for the next group coming in. Now, it did not look like this. We have enough descriptions to know that it was more of a square, and that the breads were not round like the 12 loaves here, but were very weird shape. But this is no question. This is a showbread, and we cannot explain why it looks the way it does. This picture is much easier to explain. And here we have the third holiday, the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot, around the springtime, you brought your first fruit, the bikurim, to the temple to show thanks to God for having given you a very fruitful year, and you're able to do it. Now, this is interesting because they're definitely using here the Mishnah information. You see the fruits are on top, and you see at the side that there are two pigeons tied to the side. Why? The Mishnah tells us that when you come and you bring the bikurim, the first fruits, to the temple, you're supposed to bring with them also a turtle dove. Now, it says do not put it on top of the fruit because obviously it's going to make it dirty. You put it on the side of the baskets. And here we see that they actually knew what the Mishnah said. They learned the Mishnah because in the picture, that's how they portray it. So those two pictures are pictures that relate first to the temple, the top one, and then to the tabernacle, and then again to the temple. Notice the mix and match of what we have here, because it certainly did not bring first fruits in the desert. This definitely relates to the temple in Jerusalem and not to that, but it's all interchanged. The next panel, once again, we have the zodiac. Here they're a bit more conservative. You don't see a person. Here I made this larger. You just see the orb, but you still see the chariot. And what you see here again is the 4 seasons and what has remained of the 12 months and the zodiac sign. So again, the central part of the synagogue is the zodiac there. We'll talk about it in a minute. I just want to look at the last 2 pictures, and show you what they show. Here is a picture that we've seen before, the binding of Isaac. Unfortunately, one of them is not so well preserved, but here clearly you can see the 2 servants with the donkey. Here you see the ram. We don't have Abraham and Isaac, that's gone. But here's the ram I told you. And here we see something interesting we're not told about in the Bible. Here are shoes. Why are they not wearing their shoes? Remember when Moses saw the burning bush and God says to him, take off your shoes. We do not wear shoes in a holy place. And that's why, by the way, the priests in the temple always went barefoot. They did not wear shoes. Now, we're not told that Abraham and Isaac took off their shoes, but I guess the artists felt, oh, it's a holy place. They must have taken off their shoes, because this later, according to the tradition, became the place where the temple was built. We have no evidence of that, but just a cute detail to note. So we have that. And the very last picture, this is just shows you a little better the actual picture of the 2 servants with the donkey. This is the picture. It's the very bottom. When you walk in, the first thing you see. What is this? This is Abraham with the angels who come to tell him that Sarah is going to have a child. It's clear that that's what it is, because over here, look, we're told in the Bible, in Genesis, that Sarah is standing at the door of the tent. It's behind. Now, this was all dark, just missing now. She's at the door of the tent. Behind her is a dark tent, and she's listening to the angel being fed by Abraham, who tells him the news that you're going to have a child. And she laughs, and the word Yitzchak, he will laugh. That's how the name Yitzchak comes. So here we've seen all these pictures, and it's really interesting to say, how do we understand it? The first biggest question is, how can you have zodiac? How can you have a sun god on the floor of a synagogue? And how can you have all these, what are these pictures supposed to mean? Is there a theme? Is there no theme? Now, I'm telling you right now that there are books written on it, theses, many theses written on the subject. I'm going to give you the one that's presented by Zev Weiss, who was the archaeologist who excavated ZIPPORI. And I think that what he says makes good sense. But as I said, you can just Google it after this, and you'll see so many other ways to interpret it, to explain it. But I think what he says makes good sense. The one important thing to note when we talk about ancient synagogue mosaics is that they're all in later synagogues. None of them, none till today, I also change the theory if we find anything different. None were ever found from 1st, 2nd century. Why is that? because what happens is something monumental in 333 Common Era, which is the beginning of Christianity. You have Constantine, the Roman Empire, who converts the entire empire to Christianity and moves his base, his capital, to Byzantium, today Istanbul, and the Byzantine Empire begins. Idol worship, idolatry is dead. It's gone. If this Zeus was this the god before, now he's just something to be talked about. If there was a sun god, was a god who had power before, he's no longer has power. He is just a picture now. And let me prove to you what I'm saying with a few of the important sayings from Chazal. In Mishnah Avodah Zarah, that discusses idol worship, this man, Proclus, a Greek guy, Proclus sees Rabban Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin, top rabbi in the country, coming to a bathhouse of Aphrodite. And he says, how can you go in there? How can you bathe? And he says, I'll talk to you when I come out. So when he comes out, he says, I did not come into her domain. She has come into mine. People don't say the bath was made as an adornment for Aphrodite. Rather, they say Aphrodite was made as an adornment for the bath. If in first, second centuries, Aphrodite is the goddess, and you do homage to it and you build things around to honor Aphrodite, Aphrodite has no power anymore. She's just a decoration. She's just art, nothing more. And I have no problem going to the bathhouse that has decorations that mean nothing to me. Another very important saying is, this is found in the Yerushalmi, the Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, edited in Tiberias. In the time of Rabbi Abun, they began creating pictured mosaics, and the rabbis did not stop them. This is 4th century. This is when Christianity comes to power, and we're told that the rabbis didn't stop the people from doing it. There was no reason to stop them because it was no longer idolatry. At this point, it is art. And to see how we carry it even further, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, has a verse that talks about Mirkavo Argaman. The seat of God is purple. Argaman is purple. And the commentary on it says, what does it mean his seat is purple? That's the sun, which is above, who rides the chariot and brings light to the world. In other words, the seat of God is the chariot. Notice the image of the sun god riding his chariot is used in the MIDRASH. And from the power of the sun, the rains come down. And from the power of the sun, the earth bears fruits. What is the zodiac? It's the month. It's the agricultural cycle. It's the power and the food that the sun brings. But notice the key. It's called Argaman. Now, they're playing, it's a play on words. Argaman means purple, but Argaman can also mean le'erog, to weave. And they're saying it's Argaman, it was woven by God. This entire structure was woven by God to provide manna for people. In other words, yes, the image is the chariot of Helios, but it's created by God. It's a godly creation, and we're just using an image to try and explain what it is and how it came into being. So there's no longer a restriction on using it. So that we can accept that. But why do they pick these specific pictures to be on the floor? And let me show you what Weiss says and how he explains it. The most important prayer of the day in Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit is the Shmoneh Esrei, the Amidah prayer, which has originally had 18 prayers. That's called the Shmoneh Esrei, and then they added one, so it's 19, but it's still called the Shmoneh Esrei. If you divide the entire Shmoneh Esrei into major sections, there are 3 major categories. The first one talks about the patriarchs. You begin with saying, bless God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, remember God who created the patriarchs. Remember us for their sake. What are you doing? You're walking into the synagogue and you're saying, God, we don't have merit, but our forefathers did. Remember their merits to start to pray for you, and in their merit, may you please give us some more things. Now that's the first stage. When you come into the synagogue on the floor, what do you see? Sarah and being told about a child. you see the Akedah over and over again. You're seeing the picture that we're reading about right here. The next part, section of Shmoneh Esrei, is called Gvurot, or God's might and rule over nature. There's a whole group there that talks about you're mighty, you resurrect the dead, you're powerful. In the summer, you say causes the dew to descend. In the winter, you say causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Bless the year and the varieties, bless the years. After saying, God, remember the merits of the patriarch, you're saying, God, you can do anything. You're all powerful. How do I show that in a picture? Simple. I show the seasons. I show his power to bring rain and food and the chair. And I show Helios, the sun god, who's not a sun god anymore. He's just a chariot made by God to bring it in. And you are all powerful. You can do whatever you want. Now we've established, we have merit from the patriarchs. We have, you can do anything you want. And now we're asking you, what are we asking you? The last group of prayers. Return to Jerusalem, dwell in the city, build the temple again, restore the service to your sanctuary. And whether it's the temple or it's a tabernacle, it's irrelevant. We're talking about restoring a central place of worship that we had once. When you walked into the synagogue of ZIPPORI or Beit Sha'an, near Beit Sha'an, Beit Alpha, you walked in and on the floor, even if you couldn't read, you saw your prayer, you saw your Shmoneh Esrei on the floor. And that is what the meaning of those mosaics are. So why don't we do it today? Because the world has changed, because in the 8th century, a very important movement took place across the world called iconoclasm. Icon, image, klasm, breaking, the breaking of the icons, the breaking of the images. It swept to the entire world. The Muslims accepted it more than anybody else. If you go to Jericho, you see a Muslim mosque that has so many images, you'd be shocked to see the images and the people and, etc. Stopped completely. You'll never see in a mosque anything except calligraphy or geometrics. Most Christians, not the Catholics, they still have icons, but the Protestants, for example, we know later Martin Luther King was very much against the icons, and many of them stopped having it. And the Jews certainly adopted that as well. We find that it's not just in religion, it was across the land. There's a very famous map called the MIDRASH map in the 6th century. In Jordan, we found it. It has a map of Jerusalem. It also has a map of the Dead Sea, and there are sailors on it, and the faces of all the sailors is effaced. You're not allowed to have the images. They're taking the second commandment and carrying it a step further. And we Jews did the same. Once iconoclasm swept across the world, we were involved in it just like everybody else, and we stopped using it. And it just shows that I find it's a fascinating look into the past to see how in certain eras we were much more open to a lot of other things, just like everybody else in the world was. And then we just closed that part off. And today nobody would think of showing these images in a synagogue. We still find some pictures in the last 109 years in synagogues, for example, in Jerusalem, very famous Muslim synagogue, not Muslim, sorry, Arab synagogue from Aleppo that has pictures of the tribes, but you don't have idols, you don't have that anymore. So as I said, this is only one possible explanation. There are many, many, many others. There's a whole literature written about it, and I hope that I whet your appetite sufficiently that you can go on and do your own research. I'm done with the presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing and go back. And if anybody has questions now, be my pleasure to try and respond.
Thank you very much, Ruhama.